Alright, so we're going to be talking about imaginary numbers today. So, we are going to look at imaginary numbers. And that was kind of our second warm-up question there. That's what that is based on.
Try to teach yourself imaginary numbers.
So, remember how we've always said,
My imagination is.
remember how we've always said, can you square root a negative?
Yeah.
So, we've always talked about we can't square root negative numbers. That is not the case today, because we're going to learn how to do it. So, we can square root a negative, or if I'm going to look at my warm-up question here, what number times itself equals negative 1? It's kind of the other way to look at it. And we can do this, but our numbers are imaginary. So an imaginary number is a number that doesn't exist. Sometimes they're called complex numbers. And when we, at least primarily for right now, we're going to use imaginary numbers whenever I square root a negative. So if I'm going to take the square root of negative 1, that is going to equal an imaginary number, and I'm going to call it I. And usually when I talk about I write it like this so it looks kind of like a funny eye.
Oh.
So square root of negative 1 is an imaginary number called I. And I is special, so if I take my imaginary I times my imaginary I and I multiply together, it equals negative 1.
So technically all of them equal I.
So I times I equals negative 1. Square root of negative 1 is I. It's imaginary. And the way this works is, if I'm going to take square root of negative 4 here, I don't know what the square root of negative 4 is, really. But I know what the square root of 4 is, right? Square root of 4 is 2. So basically, what I'm going to do is two different square roots. I'm going to square root this negative. I mess up my sound in my YouTube videos. Okay, we're going to square root negative 4. And to do it, basically I'm going to do two square roots. I know the square root of 4 is 2. And we just learned a square root of a negative is I. So, I'm not going to just have 2. My answer is going to be 2I. Or I2, but I phrased this badly up here. So we're going to take the negative out and put an I either at the beginning or in front if we don't know how to square root. So, the square root of negative 4 is 2I.
I2.
2 times some imaginary number. If I'm going to find the square root of negative x, do I know what the square root of x is?
It's a
I.
letter.
I don't know what the square root of x is. X is a variable. But I know what the square root of a negative is. That is I. So if I'm going to square root this, it's going to be I square root of x. I can't square root it anymore because I don't know what x is.
That's the answer?
That's your answer.
Wow.
So if you square root everything, like if I square root 4, I'm going to put my I at the end. But if all I can do is square root the negative, I'm going to put I at the beginning. So on this one, if we're going to square root this, you know what, let's just do it together. Can I square root 3x? No. But I can square root that negative, right? And that changes into an I. Square root of a negative is I. So I'm going to put my I out in front. So I square root 3x.
That's the answer.
What can we do that in class?
And we're going to be using this today when I find solutions to my quadratics. Because today, you remember all those no solution ones from yesterday? There was a couple in your homework from, not yesterday, but from last week, I guess. We're actually going to solve those today. So every quadratic has two solutions, but sometimes they're imaginary.
We're still in chapter 4.
So we are going to find the solutions of 2x squared minus 3x plus 5. So I'm going to write out my quadratic equation just so we have it. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, everything divided by 2a. Alright, so I got my a, I got my b, I got my c, and I got to be careful because b is negative 3, not just 3. So I'm going to fill in my formula. I'm going to go negative, negative 3, plus or minus square root of, then b squared is negative 3 squared minus 4 times a is 2 times c is 5. And then the whole thing is divided by 2 times a is 2. So all I did was fill in my formula. I haven't done anything with it. We're going to go through and solve it. And yesterday, we plugged in the entire square root into Desmos. Today, last time we had this class, we plugged in the entire square root. This time we're just going to plug in the stuff on the inside into Desmos. Because, I'll give you a hint, we're going to get negatives. So hang on. So I'm going to go through negative 3 is a positive.
Negative 31.
I'm going to go plus or minus square root of, and I'm going to plug that square root to Desmos in just a second. And then 2 times 2 on the bottom is 4. So I'm going to plug my negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5 into Desmos. Just give me a second. I'm going to bump it over so we can see it.
Yeah.
We had Desmos. Thought I just saw him. Alright, there's Desmos. So we are doing negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. So we're going to go negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. And I get negative 31. So I'm going to go back. I have the square root of negative 31. Can we square root that negative 31?
No.
And not really. So we're going to have to do our imaginary thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to square root the negative and put it out in front here. And we're going to have 3 plus or minus I, and then square root of 31. And then the whole thing is going to be divided by 4. So 3 plus or minus I, square root 31, divided by 4. We square root the negative. Can we square root 31?
If you want to.
I mean, we'd get a decimal, right? So it's actually going to be a little easier today. If you can square root that and get a nice number, square root it. But if you square root it and get a decimal, especially when it comes to imaginaries, don't worry about it. Just leave it in the square root. So my final answer is actually this. 3 plus or minus I square root 31, and then divided by 4. I is kind of like a variable. Can I do, like I can't do a 3 plus x and end up with a single number. I have to leave it as 3 plus x. Same thing with I. I can't put I with a regular number. So 3 plus I isn't anything. We got to leave it 3 plus I. And then, you know how I said every quadratic has 2 answers? This has both answers combined because I have this plus minus in here. My first answer is the 3 plus. My second answer is the 3 minus. So that's where I get my 2 answers. And as long as you're doing it, as long as you have an imaginary in there, that is fine. If you don't have an imaginary, you have to keep going and end up with 2 decimals or 2 numbers. But if you have imaginary, just leave it like this. So it's actually kind of easier than yesterday. You don't have to do it much. Alright, we're going to try this next couple. So, we're going to fill in, we're going to do part A here. We're going to fill in our numbers. But on part A, do we have let's see. We have A is by the x squared. Do we have a B in here?
No.
So, if we don't have a B or a C, it is automatically 0. So my B is going to be 0, and then my C is going to be 20. Hey, hush. Pay attention.
Is 0 the same as a negative?
No.
Do you treat it the same?
Why?
I got a game.
No, they'll call. They'll announce it. Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry
I
about
need
it.
to go talk to Ken because I need to go home still. To get my stuff. It was in the washer, man.
Then you said you didn't get it.
Alright,
Melissa?
let's go.
You want us to win or
Let's
lose?
go. Okay, so on this problem, A is 5, B is 0 because it doesn't show up, and C is 20. So I'm going to fill in my quadratic equation. Negative 0 plus or minus square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 5 times 20.
Is my wife
And then the whole thing is divided by 2 times 5. Okay, so we're going to go through and keep working on this. Negative 0 doesn't really matter, so I'm going to put it as 0. And I'm going to go plus or minus square root. And inside my square root, I'm going to have negative 80. Negative 80. 0 squared is 0. And it's, oh no, I missed that 4 times 5. It's not negative 80. I just did 4 times 20. So hang on. Times.
So negative, let's see, negative 20 times 20 is negative 400. And then the whole thing is divided by 10. Okay, so we're going to keep going through. And I'll pick somebody random. Thomas.
What?
Okay, we have a negative inside our square root, right? How do I get rid of that negative inside the square root? Yeah, so what's it going to look like after I do that? So we're going to go 0 plus minus, then what's it going to look like?
Square root.
Yep. So we're going to have I and then square root 400. And then the whole thing is divided by 10. Almost. Can we square root 400?
Yes, you get 20.
Yes. So we can actually square root 400. Because I can square root 400 and get a nice number, I'm actually going to do that. So if I square root 400, plug it into Desmos, I get 20. So I'm going to have 0 plus or minus 20i.
We put I-20.
You could put I-20. That's not wrong, but it's like putting x3 instead of 3x. I mean, it's more correct to put it after the number. The reason the I is not after the square root is to make sure I know that my I is outside my square root. That's why it's like that.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, Devin, this is an I, not a J.
And then the whole thing is still divided by 10.
I'm not the one asking the question.
No, you said at the beginning it was a J.
Yeah.
And then I'll let you stop it there. Because you could do one more thing. You could reduce this to 2,
No.
20 over 10. But I'll let you leave it, just so we can practice imaginaries.
Thank you.
I'll let you leave it like
Oh,
this.
divided by 10.
Yeah, because 20 divided by 10 is 2.
No.
I'll let you leave it. I'll let you leave it.
Damn right.
Alright, I want you guys to try one now. I want you to do part B in the box here.
Is there no
So, plug it into your quadratic equation, start solving it, and if you get a negative, do the I
would
thing.
be 0.
A or
B is 0.
B is 0.
So,
Alright,
on this
yeah.
one, A is 1, because that's a 1 right there.
Yeah.
B is 0, because it doesn't even show up. B is by the X.
And
There's
then
no
15 is C.
And then C is 15.
Okay.
So, fill in your quadratic equation, and then start solving it, check with your partner, and then we'll do it on the board, and then that's actually just about it for today. We're just kind of practicing with our negative.
Oh, I see what you're saying. A equals 1, B equals 0, C equals 0. I did not see that. I thought
Yeah.
that was saying A something, I, B something, 0.
No.
Sure. I 60.
Oh, what the? Oh, B equals 0. Okay, I'm gonna.
It's not a nice number, Goki.
Probably
It's
could,
not.
but that's I don't think I'll be able to do some kind of.
Wait, Goki.
Let's go. Keep going. You do isotate or
Why is there another one?
Wait a second. So, I don't understand.
A, B.
So I think that.
Yeah.
What do I do now?
So you're going to go through and solve. Does negative 0 matter? So we're going to go 0 plus minus, and then square root, and let's just plug this in here, figure it out. So 0 squared is 0, it's minus 4 times 1 is 4, times 15, makes the whole thing negative 60. Alright, then we get to keep going. So can we square root a negative 60?
No.
Kinda. Well, you gotta do the I thing, right? So do the I thing.
Negative 4. Where'd you get that?
Okay.
Oh, you're doing that one.
Oh, what?
That was a J, not an I.
I'm not worried this one has the bottom list now.
It says
There you
no.
go. And then, and if you square it 60, you do a nice number without decimals. That's your goal.
Alright.
Huh? Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1, right? 1 minus 4. Wait, negative 4 times
I'm not square root yet.
It's
Don't
a
square root yet.
I have a question.
You just don't.
Oh, but don't forget, it is times C.
Okay. I'll try to.
Negative 4 times 3.
And C is 15.
I mean,
Negative 12.
I.
Negative 12 times 2.
Okay, no, come back this way.
Negative 24 times.
What is the thing?
7.75i.
It's negative 24, right?
Fancies.
It's okay to draw
Yes.
all over my face. I don't know what I do. I
Twenty
mean, I
squared
don't know what to
times
do. I don't know what I do. Ah, yeah.
Alright, see where are you at?
I'm right here.
I don't know if I get that.
Did I write it down right? First of all. Oh, wait.
Okay, what'd you, oh.
We're gonna start solving. What's negative 0?
1
So 0 plus or minus.
3 times.
I'm telling you.
Plus, then just square root. And then figure out what this is.
23.
So,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
no,
okay.
plug the whole thing into.
That's mine.
Both.
Well,
I said the
we
first
got 12 times
Wait.
2.
Oops, I forgot that you did.
There is square.
What?
We got 12 times 2 is 24.
Wait, put the zero square.
He said yeah, he did give rides. He did give rides, and that's the one thing I was grateful for.
Right, cookie, come here.
Like that.
Order of operations.
No, just put it in as one.
This was the need.
Are you sure?
Oh,
It'd be negative 12.
no.
That's what I did
That's
wrong.
1
Wait,
minus.
not I.
So it's 1 minus
Oh.
negative. Or negative 24.
Oh, we
which is
forgot to
negative
minus
24.
one.
Which is negative 24.
So I was right. And you can't divide that by nice. Nice way. Yeah, you can. You probably put 8.
What do you get for being negative?
4 plus 1 is I. 2 over 2.
Oh, shoot.
4 plus minus I. I was set it up.
This is, there's no ice in it.
This stuff's actually way easier.
Ah,
And Mr. Branson gave me credit for it.
Watch, he's gonna set this one.
Always certain action.
Dude,
He always
I
does.
married Beyonce.
Always.
Recommended my
Always.
husband didn't marry Beyonce.
yeah, how can there be a negative zero?
I was married and married.
Ugh.
I wanted to marry my husband. I'd be like, do it or I'm gonna leave you.
Oh, I guess you said.
Alright, we're gonna go over this one.
No, come here.
Go.
Never mind, I'm gonna go over here real quick.
No,
That's the next problem. I'm not helping with that one.
Like,
You know,
Wait.
Don't worry about it.
A number.
Did you get 1?
No,
Did you get 1 square root of 12 over 6?
No. What the heck?
Why did you not get that? 3 squared. 0 minus 4 times 3 times 2.
What?
You're drunk.
And then under the.
You're doing it wrong.
And then,
We're being serious. You're doing it wrong. Check it. A, B, C. You're doing it. No, you put A instead of B there.
By doing the I thing, right? So, we're gonna switch to negative to get
Buffoon.
Imbecile.
yeah,
You ignoramus.
so.
No, I'm not
Where'd
stupid.
you pop? You pop for lunch.
But then I
So
told you
where's
to.
Dairy Queen?
What?
He went to Dairy Queen.
Where's Dairy Queen?
What are you talking about?
You and your pop.
Which is
Oh,
I see you. I
Dad drove in.
was like,
Where?
sitting in front of you.
Where?
Like, right by Dairy Queen. Subway.
Who were you in?
Me.
Or no,
60, just 60.
Wait, did you get your license?
I've had
it's
those.
like,
And then don't
Wait, what
forget.
are you driving?
What are you driving?
My wife.
I need to get a car.
Me too. We're a mom's trip.
But we're just gonna leave it. It's kind of like an X.
no, but
Can't
this is like
really do
huge.
anything
Like
with
when yours
those.
Square root of negative 1.
yours is really
I mean,
Not-
what's
I mean-
the, what are you?
Alright,
That's all.
so.
No, I know. There's not like
You guys good?
We get the lesson.
Alright, you guys good. Alright, we're not going over this because everybody got it right that I checked.
Did you check everybody?
Mostly.
So you didn't
You
check
didn't check
everybody?
us.
Well, Jaden was still working on it. Alright, do the next one.
Okay.
Do the next one in the box. Last in class.
God.
Last in class. It's not that bad.
Can you turn on Socrative?
It's pretty bad.
Well,
Okay, go, okay, go, okay, go.
Say secretive.
Go, get, go, get.
Secretive. Secrete juices. How many? Oh, too much work.
Oh, we're cutting today.
You are?
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if I can.
I got my 4 times 2 is 12.
Did you plug in your
Double.
I don't know where that came from.
Make sure it
Double check this.
says.
That's definitely boggle my arm.
I kind of
like
like
this.
that.
So what's negative 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2?
New bud.
Boom.
Put it in
Snake.
parentheses.
I'm pretty sure I haven't been past 60, so that's what I'm trying to do.
Because now watch what happens.
Oh, God.
Well, what's your high score?
I have no idea. Forget. I
You
probably
should have made it a different color, man. It's boring now.
You're boring. Always.
Because
It's
you
not
got
called
the negative
boring.
excuse me, square.
You're right.
Oh,
What the?
come on.
So your answer is going to be
11.
right here.
Oh yeah, then that's
Suck.
It will be 23 inside your square.
I'm tired.
I knew that.
Negative 20?
Mm-hmm.
In parentheses.
Remember, because that's why we do the I thing. So really, that's a negative 23 right there. Instead of 25.
What is that called?
And then we do that.
And then do that. But can we square root 23?
If you want.
We did about
No, it's not a J.
You have to do
Oh, why do I keep doing that?
8. Where'd you get 8?
Thank you.
No, I said A.
For catching that, 'cause I would've. Wait, go. I mean,
Minus 4 times A times
Why are
C.
you listening?
you already put the I?
That's Coleman, right?
4 times 8 times.
What?
That's cool, man. Puzzle block ancient.
Oh my
What a
goodness.
game.
Divided by 2x.
What a name.
No, it's not. I have the one I squares. No,
Hey!
Wait, respect me.
Agent.
I want to see Goki's game of
Yeah,
Mash.
sure. But
You don't.
I want to see a game
Hey,
of
did you ever
Mash.
finish
I'm
that?
never sure.
That one game was like the.
So if you.
What am I doing? Oh, crap.
Digging
I
in
just
the
wasted.
No, I haven't finished that one. It got too complicated. I
Oh.
did the game of the place where
What am I supposed to do?
I don't know, drag.
Negative B.
I could have kept that other
These are
answer. I
negative,
could've put
so that
negative
can
in
put,
there.
okay, and then I put, okay.
You're wasting your
Like negative
turns.
4 would turn into a positive.
Okay.
I'm hungry. Me not. You want this? I mean,
Yo,
this
sister,
is.
go.
You get this?
Okay, now what do I do? Do I like, sorry.
You wasted so many
Type it
turns.
all into Desmos and then.
Huh,
This
still
is
got me
so
started.
judgmental.
You're allowed to get 5.
Freaking hate it.
What?
Yeah, there's 2 other stars.
So this guy.
No, it's not. Shut up. I'm gonna put this right here. This right here. This right here.
Decline.
Uh-oh.
The whole thing is divided by.
This right there.
You could have did that 2 ways.
This one guy?
Probably.
I picked it around for
Speed
now.
demon.
Okay, so
So this is really
this guy. So I kind of talked to him.
I
And then like,
do like
and
that.
then
No.
I posted the bonus of the.
So now you're gonna start putting stuff in. So negative 0
Hey, shut up.
plus minus square root. All this whole thing is
You don't say that.
No. Shut up.
divided by 2 times 1.
I really care. I'm just like,
No?
oh my
Oh,
goodness.
2 times 1 is 2, and then I divide
So
6
good.
into 60 by 2.
So then.
Because we have that negative 60 there, right?
Yeah, okay.
But we can't really do the negative.
Nope.
So you have to do something too.
Yeah.
You know what, guys?
I
I don't like your attitude.
And then because I squared 60 really is that nice number, just leave it.
Nope.
That is fine.
No divided by 2.
And
Dang it. I know what I gotta do now.
0 plus minus.
It all changes.
You can square 60
Hey,
plus
cheers.
Yes. He's like yes, I must have been.
Nope.
If you want to.
Oh.
And
So don't have anything he wants.
Nope.
Or you have anything he wants. Remember that one guy? This guy,
Hey, hey, I fall asleep.
Boss level.
He's like, oh yeah, I'm red. He's like, you have a boyfriend. I said, if not, then don't do it. Just say hi back. I was like, oh my god. And I was like, hi.
all right, let's start going over this maybe.
No.
You know what? We're gonna call this our exit ticket because some people are done.
I hate that.
Oh my god.
I know.
Every time.
All right, so some of you guys are still working on this. Keep working on it. I'll go around and check in a minute. But we have a few people that are done already. So I'm gonna put the homework on the thing real quick, and then if you're done, you can start the homework.
Don't like.
Oh.